piggybacking on that, I probably won't see your questions because I have the chat on a whole different screen. Yeah, so I probably won't answer anything. Checking under the hood, auditing your website for a smooth ride. I would like to acknowledge something first before I start. I'd like to acknowledge the land that I'm sitting on today. It's the unceded territory of the Ohlone lands in Northern California, specifically the Mutsun region. And I did this basically to demonstrate a commitment to bringing the process of eliminating, of working to dismantle the ongoing legacies of colonialism. So I'm on the Ohlone lands. And who am I? My name's AmyJune, that's title camel case, and not Amy and not June, but AmyJune altogether. I go by she, her. I am the community ambassador and QA UX engineer for Kanopi Studios. I do a lot of stuff in the community. I mentor and train at various camps across North America. I'm a member of the community working group on our community health team. I am a hospice nurse by trade, and I like to mention that because I do QA and accessibility training, because my ongoing experience as a nurse, because I'm still a licensed nurse, it really keeps me in touch with the challenges that folks face, many of the end users. When I first got into tech, 5 years ago or so, it was a really enlightening moment for me that I found out that people could build accessible websites, but they don't. So it was a kind of this just niche I fell into. I helped my friend Carrie Fisher, who most of you might know. She's a Chicagoan, with an online meetup every month called Ally Talks. That's A11YTALKS. I am a self-described non-coder. And so one of the things I like to do is I like to go to all the camps and conventions and teach people how to give back to Drupal in ways more than just code, like have everyone in our community feel important. Outside of that helping passion, I love mycology and geocaching. And I love word games and painting and air-cooled Volkswagens. And this leads into the Volkswagen part of why do they call me Volkswagen chick? And I thought this was a fun way to sort of let folks know in this talk specifically. I am the youngest sibling of many, and I ended up with a really cruddy Volkswagen when I got my driver's license. It was constantly breaking down. At stoplights, I'd have to get out of my car and quickly fiddle with the gas mixture in the carburetors, or reattach vacuum hoses and things like that. And then if I went down any sort of elevation, adjust the gas mixtures. And then in a previous lifetime before nursing, I actually went to school to be an engineer. And through a series of maybe fortunate events, I ended up working at the Volks Cafe in Santa Cruz, working on air-cooled Volkswagen engines. And about that same time, I'm a Luddite by heart. I embraced email. And the name Volkswagen Chick really came from having to choose my first Hotmail address. And I'm really dating myself by even admitting I still have my Hotmail address. But as my lifetime sort of carried through nursing and tech, all these years of having to sign up for forums and profiles, I'm still like a deer in the headlights when I have to pick a handle. So I just sort of stuck with Volkswagen Chick. And I like it in the Drupal community because it indicates that I'm female too. So that's just sort of a bonus. Kanopi brings me here today. We're an open source website strategy, design, development, and support agencies. We really like to work on projects that make a positive impact, higher ed, nonprofit, government, things like that. So now moving into the presentation, I want to talk about what are some of the reasons why we may want to audit a website. Our pages are slow to load. Site pages that take more than 3 seconds to load. It's like comparing your motor if you're only running on 36 horsepower and everyone else is upgraded to 45. They have a 1200 cc and you're still working on 36 horse. People will evacuate your site if it takes too long to load. Maybe your site is no longer responsive. Your site doesn't display well on different devices. Your text may look good and fit on a desktop, but it takes too long to scroll through on a mobile device. Perhaps you have woes about adding your content. Updating content is difficult and frustrating. How much of a lift is uploading your data? You could have confused users. Site visitors can't find what they need, and it may confuse people. They could end up not getting what they came for. This can lead to lower conversions and possible negative feedback. Folks could have troubles using your site. Visitors can become increasingly agitated that they can't use your site with assistive technology. And I talk a lot about accessibility in a site audit because I'm so passionate about it. Your users could experience disaster, do bugs, and that's pun intended, keep crashing your site, making it impossible for the site to feel current. And then does the design of your site, it hasn't changed in some time, making your site seem outdated and possibly boring. Does your site look like everybody else's? And perhaps your site has become insecure over the years. You haven't done your maintenance and you haven't done your updates. Your site isn't loading over HTTPS. It could be throwing security warnings that people won't bypass to get to your site. And then has your site been compromised or hacked? Can no one figure out how many, no one can figure out why things aren't working? How many modifications are there on your site? Is it really important for you to address all of these issues? Well, certainly. A website that isn't working optimally, much like this beat up Volkswagen in the picture, can dramatically affect your bottom line, especially if you're using your site for conversions for other things. So let's talk about what happens when time passes. And maybe not during the pandemic, but it usually passes faster than we imagine. You haven't updated your site in 2 years because you think it was just 6 months ago. 39% of people will stop engaging with a website if the content is unattractive. And that can really damage your credibility. Some issues can break trust in your visitors, making them not want to return. More than half of the population worldwide are active internet users. And when I wrote this slide, I think I wrote it 6 months ago or so, there are currently almost 4 million unique mobile internet users worldwide. So that's unique, 4 million users worldwide. So that means out of the 5.1 billion people, or billion mobile phone owners, more than 3/4 of them use their phones to access the internet. And it's estimated that something like 1.2 billion people use a tablet. So as people grow with technology, so should our businesses, to make sure that we're getting the most out of these devices that people are using. Unhappy customers can end up packing up and looking for other places to complete their business. 39% of people will stop engaging with a website if images or any of the data won't load or takes too long to load. So think about the content consumers who don't have access to decent broadband or high-speed internet, because it really is a privilege to have high-speed internet. Even where I live in Northern California, I have to tell people I live rurally and my internet can cut out anytime. And so now I want to talk about the different parts of an audit, because there's really different spaces. But first, I just want to pause for a moment to hold space for Black Lives Matter. Okay, to really see that optimal website health, you not only need to look at the code base or the technical part of it, but you also need to make sure that there's a smart user experience. You can see, as per this lovely non-Volkswagen Venn diagram. I have no Photoshop skills, so I could not make my own Venn diagram. So you can see here, it's a balance of having that smart user experience and a strong technical foundation. We're going to focus on the strong foundation, technical foundation first, and then I'm going to talk about the accessibility of a site. Having an accessible site really builds usability. It makes for a better user experience. They sort of work hand in hand. And also for your bottom line, the more accessible your website is, the better optimized it is for site for SEO. So as devs, we strive to make our data-driven decisions. So we need to dig into things such as like the actual statistics, what features work and what features don't work. Does the site meet user experience best practices? And then from those data-driven results, you can build out your expectations. You want to understand the purpose of the site. You really want to make sure that you understand and help users accomplish their goals. Have storyboards, have personas. So there's a few ways that you can do this. You can obtain data on the actual site use. There's Google Analytics and heat maps. You can assess things like site content features. And is the information model really appropriate for who's actually using your site? And that gets down into your user stories and your personas. Provide analysis and feedback and recommendations for using and improving user experience. Creating roadmaps can help account for continuous growth, because a website's health is a moving target, especially when content is continually added, because our content authors and our content editors are in the site far longer than developers. So we have to take that into account when we think about an audit, because it is a moving target. And some of the things that you can collect the data, you can use user surveys, interviews, analytics, and test against personas. So talking a little bit about the technical audit. It's basically understanding the underlying foundation of how the site operates and how users are actually using your site. You should look at the technical side of things. What version of Drupal core is the site on? What contributed modules are you using? Is there any custom code? We want to know how everything works, and we want to make it easier to support the site needs. So blueprinting everything is pretty important. We also want to look at the hosting solution to confirm the product owners and stakeholders are really getting the most for their money. Are they getting the value that they need? Be sure that they aren't paying for extra services on Pantheon that they don't need, things like that. And one of the most important things is to remember that some of those third-party integrations that we have all known and grown to love may not be accessible, and they may even slow down your site. So the goal of the audit is really to provide feedbacks about ways your site can be efficient. So the accessibility part. Understanding exactly who uses your site, again, can effectively and correctly communicate and touch the accessibility side of the audit. So you want to make sure that you run scans with tools to check things like HTML structure and basic page overviews. You can use Google Analytics and other things to identify those top traffic pages, and make sure you look at every different type of page. So analyze your admin menu and go through and look at your content types and make sure that you test a page from every one of your content types, and then every one of those top pages in your Google Analytics. Blog articles, news pages, contact forms, all the pages. You can use keyboards to check your tab order and how your items respond to the keyboard. And you can finish your accessibility audit with using assistive technology tools like VoiceOver to make sure that there's correct semantics and all of those attributes and landmarks are read properly and in order. But I do want to recommend that we as devs should have native screen readers really test those pages, because they use those tools differently than sighted folks do. Because as developers, we can cheat. We know what to look for. We know how we want the page to perform. So that can skew our results. And I just want to say that again. I really advocate for real users to do your accessibility testing. And then, you know, coming back and periodically checking in and reviewing for accessibility, because again, after adding content, accessibility is that moving target. And sometimes the WCAG, the WCAG guidelines change over time, especially as new user agents are introduced and developed. We're always creating new tools to make the accessibility of a website easier for folks. So let's break it down and unpack it. So the preliminary work, and this is iterating because these things are important. Really look at the version of Drupal core or WordPress or whatever that you're using. First off, is it secure? Are all of the security patches applied? Are all of your modules up to date? What are, when you go into your status report, what are the top logged errors and what happened since the last time you checked? You can review modified files. Were there things committed to code that shouldn't have been? Are there vendor files that are loading? Is there local documentation on a production site? Because we know that we have tools that we use on our development and our test sites that can slow down page loads on our development site. So we want to make sure that we have all that stuff turned off. We want to make sure that we check for patch documentations for not just core. Is there a patches folder to review every time you do an update? And these are usually items that can be inspected in the admin window with the status report and logged messages and top pages not found. I did support for a while with Calamuna. They're a Drupal shop in Oakland, California. And it was my job every week to do security updates. And I loved this hacked module because we would inherit sites from other companies, like maybe mission-driven companies who might not have had enough money to employ Drupal developers who use best practices. And so I would use the hacked module because it would check all of the modules and sort of spit out a diff file for me so I could see if you know, any of the modules were hacked. It does have a Drupal 8 version. It seemed a little clunky the last time I used it, but that was maybe 9 months ago, so maybe it's improved since then. But it's super easy to use. It checks all the modules at once. It checks the contributed modules against the GitLab repository, and it lists all those modified files. You can see that. It's really easy. It's a simple diff file. Looking at your site status report page, it tells the basics and simples about your site. You know, is core updated to the latest version? Do we see more green or are we seeing more yellow and reds? You know, it's a great visual indicator for some of us to at a quick glance see what needs to be done. And it also lists like what the recommended version is too and what you have. And that way you can check against the change logs and make sure when you update, if you haven't updated in a while, you're not breaking anything. Super important to check those change logs. The security review module, this was written and maintained by members of the Drupal security team. And the slide really says it all. It evaluates easy to make mistakes that we can all make when developing sites. We've all written code that has holes in it. And it quickly looks at fields for malicious content. I recommend this one a lot. And then we need to really check out the look and feel of our site. So we want to examine the theme. And we want to review all of the different aspects. Are you using a page builder? Because this can slow down the site and make development more time consuming. Are you using proper Drupal coding standards? And are you making sure they're being followed by all the developers? You know, using all of the available Drupal functions in place of PHP functions, escaping output, sanitizing user input, that's super important. You can queue up scripts and styles instead of adding to the head or body directly. You know, look in your templates. Do they contain any complex PHP? Is your markup semantic? Super important. HTML5 is great. There's no reason not to use HTML5. Is there logic that's tied to the theme that should be put in a custom module, perhaps? Is your site responsive? You know, we all know that more and more of us use cell phones and tablets in our day-to-day life than we use desktops. Are your images being sized correctly for the various screens? You know, you can visit Andy at the Fox Valley Meetup soon when he talks about optimizing images for the web. You really want to make sure that you optimize and have like maybe even different breakpoints for different images so it's not so slow to load. Are your external resources being compressed? Do you have load blocking JavaScript? Are you loading in is something render blocking? It means that it's keeping the page from loading as quickly as it can. And then think about if your templates access and use data according to Drupal best practices. And then are your styles well organized and extensible? And for most websites, how they rank on Google and all of those different search engines is super important. So checking and reviewing some of those SEO basics. Do you have a sitemap installed? Are you excluding things from your XML map? Are you using helper modules in Drupal, like meta tags or XML sitemap or meta tag schema? Are your headings nested properly? Are you using those appropriately? Remember, headings aren't for style, they're for structure. And this helps with site crawling too. Think about whether or not you're using structured data for your organization and site content. And do you have the right markup to support Twitter cards and Facebook sharing? Because all of that is different. You can ask about Google Search Console and set up a dashboard so you can see numbers really quickly. And then, you know, drop your URL in Google page speed and see where you're ranked. And I have some links to these tools later. Review your custom code. Is your custom code necessary? And what custom code is being used? Because sometimes it is necessary. And when it is, we want to make sure we want to see the custom code is actually enabled. So review your documentation for what the module's main purpose is, because future you might not remember the last time you went through the audit process, and having that documentation really helps speed up the audit the next time. And then see if anything can be done from already established contributed modules. But sometimes those contributed modules can contain a lot of bloat. So really assessing those contributed modules before you enable it on your site is super important. You know, are there only a couple of things that you need? Certainly create some custom code. And then access, you know, assess your code quality, right? Your scripting standards. Do you meet those? Again, I'm iterating because it's important. Does your site meet coding standards? Does your JavaScript validate? I think people are using Airbnb standards these days. So just declare your rules. Does it work in all your browsers? Are all your semicolons in all the right places? And look at your front end standards. Are the styles that drive the look and feel of your site, are they well structured and easy to extend? Perhaps looking to see if there's a pattern library and how you can implement that to help with some of your code quality. And again, back to patching. Have changes been made in places that make it hard to upgrade your site? having a patches folder with a README really helps keep, well, just like any sort of documentation, it really helps the future you understand why that patch is in place. And perhaps having links to that Drupal.org issue in your documentation to make sure that the patch is still just a patch and not applied in the code, because there's no sense having patches that are already in the updated modules. And then testing for accessibility. Can you use your keyboard to navigate the site? If you turn off all your CSS, can you read through the site without getting lost? Can you use a text-based browser? That's pretty enlightening for some folks. A lot of people have images and styles turned off because it's distracting, and they like the look and feel of a Craigslist looking website. So really turning off that stuff can enlighten you, like for the flow of the website even. Do all of your images contain alternative texts? Do you have skip navigation for your menus? Do you have a skip to main content link? Do your headings on the site go in descending orders without skipping levels? And I'm going to talk about some of the tools and then give like a little 5-minute demo at the end. So I don't want to like pass up the accessibility stuff, but I'm going to talk about it again. And then you really want to push your performance, right? You're only as strong as the weakest link on your site. Is the hosting provider reliable, and does the plan support your needs? Again, going back to that value for your buck. Could it be lowered to possibly save the client money, or should it be increased to help with site resources? You know, what kind of CDN are they using for the file and image assets? And a CDN is it stands for Content Delivery Network. And it's really a system of distributed servers all over the planet that deliver images and other web content based on where you are, your locality and your geographic location. So being aware of, you know, how reliable your CDN service is. And, you know, talking a little bit more about performance. Enable page and block caching so they don't have to rebuild or be rendered with every load. Increases your performance. Enabling CSS and JavaScript aggregation, combining those together. Aggregation caches the CSS and JS aggressively. You can optimize your images. And again, this is the process of decreasing their file size. You can either use a script or a plugin, which in turn speeds up the load time of each page. I think I'm going, I can't see my slides. Making sure that you minify and bundle your CSS. This removes the white spaces and combines all of them into a single file. And this is, I experience this more on WordPress sites, but only loading the files that you need. You know, don't take the time to load admin files on a public facing site. The admin side can have a ton of files, and it's okay to make your admins wait. It's not okay to make your users wait. So make sure that depending on the environment, you only load the pages that you really need. Add pagination to your site, implement a load more option, because that way that first initial response when they go to your page is super quick because they're only loading what's being seen. And that really helps with that performance. So read your docs. Is there documentation? How does one set up a site locally? What tools and dependencies are used? And there's different degrees of setting up your documentation. There's the project level, you know, is the overall architecture and site goals written down and available to developers? Because as a site passes through hands and stakeholders, having that architecture and that goal and roadmap is super important for the next set of people. And then there's documentation on a more granular level, the component level. You know, just making sure it's clear how your custom code is written, your plugs, your theme, how does it fit into that overall site? Can the site be easily extended? And then of course your code documentation is super important for future you. And now I want to talk about accessibility. And this is what I'm really passionate about. So I go into this a little bit more detail because I think sometimes developers aren't aware of some of these things, and some of these are really quick fixes. So for those of you that don't know, accessibility is super important for developers and organizations to create those tools and the high quality websites, from excluding people from using the products and services. And this includes our Drupal developers too. So making sure that our admin interfaces are accessible too. I worked for a team one time that wasn't concerned with how accessible their admin interface was because they didn't have anyone who needed it yet. So their solution was, if we hire someone that needs the accessibility features, we'll add it then. But all of it should really be baked in from the beginning, including the admin stuff. Because according to the Center for Disease Control, 26% of people living in the United States live with a disability. And that's 1 in 4. And remember, not every disability can be seen. There's situational, temporary, and unseen disabilities. And remember, as we all age, we become a little bit less able. Our eyesight and hearing can diminish over time. Situation disability would be someone like a mom on the Bay Area Rapid Transportation. That's our train here in the Bay Area. She's carrying the baby and she's got her cell phone, but she has left her headphones behind, and there's no closed captioning on that YouTube player. So that's a situational disability. So can users navigate with the keyboard? Users with mobility disabilities, including things like carpal tunnel, repetitive stress injuries, may not be able to use a mouse or a trackpad. Or me, I can never find my mouse, or it's out of batteries, or something's interrupting the Bluetooth. So making sure that keyboard users can navigate your site. Are there keyboard traps? So that means if the person can enter a component like an accordion, or vertical tabs, can they exit that component just using their keyboard as well? Does the page have a sufficient means to skip features in your application? There should really be a skip to main content link. And this is baked into Drupal. You have to take that feature out of Drupal. So what that helps with is pages that have tons of content, they're broken into smaller chunks and they can be skipped to, so a user doesn't have to tab through the whole navigation menu to get to the main content. And then do all of your elements which receive focus, receive keyboard focus. And that means all menus and levels of a site should be accessible to the keyboard user, avoiding using buttons or action items that can only be accessed with the mouse hover. So making sure that those elements that are important can all be reached through the keyboard. Do your images contain alternative text? Are there images of text on your website? Back to, if you turn off all your CSS or styles, can you read through the site without getting lost? Is there a good flow? And this isn't, like I said before, and I'm iterating, it's not only for screen readers, but some folks who have cognitive issues turn off the images in the browser. And of course, again, people who have slow internet turn off images because it takes too long to load. And of course, some images don't need alternative text, like icons and decorative images, and then images that have enough context around them that support them. This is the law speaking here, but I have issues around decorative images, but I can talk 45 minutes about why I think decorative images should have alt text. And that's just something you need to think about on your own. If there's tables on your site, and I'm hoping that there isn't a table to format content on your site anymore because we no longer use Dreamweaver. But remember that tables are for data, not for layout. And that tables should include the headers and the rows and the columns that explain how the cells correspond with each other. And then if it's an image of a table, you should really have a long description describing the content of that. Can your screen reader read through all the content as it's presented on the screen? And this extends to dialogues, you know, those modals that pop up, overlays, pop-ups, light boxes, slideshows, error messages, page updates, all of the things that pop up on your screen. Can a screen reader read those? Can a keyboard get to those? And can they get out of those? And be sure that all of those alerts that are happening are read in real time if they're important. Can your text be resized without obscuring the content? Your page and your content should still be functionable when the text is magnified to 200%. And so be sure that the content doesn't require scrolling in both directions as well, because that's hard to navigate. And then lastly, you know, do you have landmarks and are they properly defined between being ARIA and HTML5? And the first rule of ARIA is don't use ARIA, right? So make sure that many of those functions that we use to require the ARIA stuff, that we use the HTML5 version instead. You know, that's what's great about HTML5, you know, semantics. So what makes your website accessible? There's 4 broad parameters. You make it easy to see, so you accommodate people's visual needs. You make it easy to interact with, so you accommodate motor needs. You want to make sure that it's easy to hear, so you accommodate auditory needs. And then you want to make sure that's easy to understand, so you accommodate cognitive needs as well. And we want to make sure the experience is as equivalent as possible, regardless of the things we can't control, like what size computer are they using and their tablet size and the phone operating system. And then content is just as important as code. This goes back to that moving target. As the internet extends, it becomes a world stage. And remember that reading and understanding the English language is a privilege. Our content should be easy for everyone to understand. So I want to talk a little bit about this because this is important for a site audit too. Using plain language. According to usability.gov, we want to write at the 9th grade reading level. Of course, there's exceptions like white papers and, you know, targeted audiences, but for the most part, we want to write at the 9th grade reading level. The standard ideal is no more than 20 words per sentence and 5 sentences per paragraph, and we want to make sure that we use plain language. Because no one reads anymore. We scan, we look at the headings, so make sure we break up our content into easily digestible chunks, like bullet points and numbered lists. There's captions, subtitles, and alternative text. We want to make sure that any of the images on our site, including videos and visual information, have that alternative text. So when creating your alternative text, the text should really contain the message you wish to convey. So if your site contains a slideshow, make sure that every photo in that slideshow has alternative text, and make sure that each photo can be navigated to using the keyboard. Talking a little bit about captions. Captions should include things like inflection, like whispering and yelling, because that can add to the content of your page. Image captions may give content to the alt text as well. You know, an alternative would be a man and boy playing basketball, and the caption might be studies showing that fathers and sons playing basketball helps with, you know, X, Y, and Z. Your table data and your infographics should have clear headings, and assistive technology users should be able to interpret all of the parts of your data. Like the long description tag is really handy for this. Be sure your audio and video files include transcripts, PDFs. Make sure that the content that your site links to for information is accessible, as well as everything on your site. Because folks who use assistive technology rely on clear and concise text for context. And PDFs is a monster in itself. Sometimes what you can do is just move forward with PDFs, because most of the PDF programs, to create your PDFs have accessibility baked in, but you have to turn it on. And it's just a matter of using it very much like how you would lay out the content of your page, making sure you have headings, making sure you have alt text, making sure your links are descriptive, things like that. And then back to the headings, they are not used for style. They have a clear function, and people who rely on adaptive devices depend on that consistent, predictable heading structure for their consumption of your information. And again, people don't read, they scan. So your H1 to H6s, they're used to define the structure, where the H1 defines the most important heading and the H6 defines the least important heading. And we don't want to skip that. It's much like your school outline. And there should only be one heading per page. Again, headings are not for style. Okay, so unpacking it, audits are important. Not just developers, but site owners, so they know the status of everything. They want to be abreast with what's going on with their website. It can consist of different aspects. We talked about the technical, the user experience, and the accessibility. And when reviewing the technical side, look at those different aspects from Drupal's initial reports to review the performance of your site. The UX audit, the data is important to make your best decisions. Look at your user groups. Take user feedback. If someone says something about your site, strive to improve the experience for everyone. And then your web accessibility audit really should encompass all of the challenges that folks face. It isn't just code, but be consistent with your content. And it's not just screen readers either. When people think of accessibility, sometimes they just think of screen readers and blind, but there's all different reasons why people use assistive technology when they navigate your site. So making sure that you review the code and making sure that everything really stands up to those WCAG standards. And then making sure your content is accessible by, having it be structured and understandable. And then I'm going to share these slides, but there's some links to some performance tools. And then there's some links for some accessibility tools. And some of these are pay for services, and the pay for services I don't give links to because there's free tools out there. So I'll just provide those links. But I'm sure everyone can figure out where that is. So thank you. That's the presentation, but I will take questions, and I do want to give a little bit of a demo if anyone's interested on some really quick accessibility tools that people can use that are really convenient and just make the whole experience a bit better. So are there questions?
All right, so I gave everybody the ability to unmute yourself. So if you want to unmute yourself, let's give AmyJune a round of applause. Some people might still be on mute. But yeah, if anybody has questions, again, everybody should be able to unmute themselves at will again.
So I want to do a quick demo really quick. There's two websites that I like to use. I don't drink Starbucks, but it's an accessible website. But geocaching, that's one of my hobbies and I love it, but their website is awful. So if I reload this page, this is some of the stuff I was talking about. If I hit the tab key, I have no idea where I am. So that's where your visible focus comes into effect, is making sure that people who, like right now, you can see that I'm on the play button, but making sure when people are tabbing to the different links and things like that, they know where they are. So having that clear indicator focus is super important. I want to show my favorite tool, and we want to remember that automated tools only capture 25 to 30% of our errors because they're done in a program, right? But the Site Improve browser extension is super handy for your high level testing to get all those sort of like global issues. Because when you hit the button, which is just a button up here, it opens up this dialog over here. And it talks about all the different things that are wrong with your site. Not only the things, the errors that they found, but it also goes into things that you should check manually, which is super important. So it'll give you which images need alt text, but then it gives you this clue of should these images be marked as decorative. So you can go through those individual images and find them. You know, it talks about, it reminds you that you have a video player. Is your video player accessible? You know, the video player, oh, is it captioned? So this is a really handy tool to get that like sort of broad scope of an accessibility test.
AmyJune, I have a question for you.
Sure.
Now, because I have a client that I do some work with, but they work with Smartly, which is a PHP framework. Now, what are some of the tools that you would suggest for that, doing a site audit? Because I know they have some problems with site loading. Obviously, there's a lot of meta tags that are missing.
So I might not have the answer to that. I don't know why the same tools wouldn't be used across different frameworks.
Okay.
Does anyone else have the answer to that? Because a lot of these automated tools are used through the URL, you know,
Okay. Right.
like all these performance tools, you know, you run the URL regardless of what your framework is, and it gives you all of these, all of your, you know, well, not all of it, but the things that they're programmed to test for will give you the readings. And much like here's the Starbucks site, if you go into your inspect element and
Right.
you hit Lighthouse, you know, you've got a tool that you can check your different things for, and it doesn't matter what your site is built with. It tests all the things that they test for across all, you know, across different frameworks.
Right.
So.
Okay.
Hey, now that everybody can actually unmute themselves, now let's give AmyJune a round of applause.
Yay!
That was my fault earlier.
Operator,
What's wrong with you?
A quick note before we move on to more questions. Bob had asked if we were going to archive and post all these links elsewhere. The answer is no, unless you do it yourself. If anybody wants to round up these links and tweet them out, there's some free SEO for you.
Oh, I have, I can share my slide deck.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah, do that. And I copied the chat, so I can send that to you, Dwayne, or whatever. You betcha.
I don't know how to share with screen. Oh, there it is. I just hide everything.
It's like Hussein's having problems unmuting. Let's see if we can.
No.
Well, if you're having problems unmuting, let us know.
Okay.
Okay, I guess we're unmuted.
Yeah, because one of my clients, I know they have problems with load times, and I have an idea why it's a problem, but I just need to justify it.
Right. A lot of times the load times might have to do with like if vendor files are in there, you know, how really going through all of those files that aren't necessary. And then there's a couple of tricks you can do, like I said, like adding where only part of your page loads at once and the page loads as you scroll. That can help with load times too.
I think it has more to do with the print designer throwing up 300 PPI images, RGBs, to a website.
Yeah, optimizing images like.
And oh my gosh, this is not big enough. Let me make it a little bit bigger.
Okay, I think I got the this situation figured out. Sorry, everybody.
Hey.
Yay.
Sorry about
Oh.
Hey.
that. More applause.
Thank you.
Sorry,
But
sorry
you
about that.
know,
That was my fault.
Show me.
several of those page speed testing tools will break it down for you too. If images are taking a long time to load, they'll tell you that. You know,
Which one is that?
this is GT Metrics.
Okay, I'm putting that into my notes.
And it's free. You know, it doesn't test for everything, but it's a good start.
Right. That's all I need is a good start, solid start.
One addition.
Go ahead, Rolf.
If you take a look at web page test, 1 second, there you have various options. On one hand, you're able also to run Lighthouse alongside, but there's also the option that you're able to validate the quality of your responsive images and how they are compressed and so forth. So it's more or less the most comprehensive test, in my humble opinion. You're able to assess.
All right, I'm marking that down.
Because I have that in the slide deck too. Is it this one, Rolf?
Yep.
Okay.
And in regards, there are two, in that one I ran also. But 2 tips for web page test, also for debugging performance-related issues. It's one recommendation I ran into the forums there. That is something I used for WordPress mostly, is run a test first with the domain you want to test, and then the domain with, for example, the license point txt. So you bypass MySQL and so forth. So you test more or less the plain server performance. So you can say, okay, the problem with performance is in your installation or on your hosting side.
Okay. All right.
And the other thing is, it is possible in web page test that you don't use the cable option, but instead you can test on real devices. I normally use Moto G4 on a 3G slow connection. So you take care that more or less the Moto G4 is once recommended by some Google folks as the most common performance average. And if you take that, you make that fast, then it's also fast for cable connections.
Right. Okay.
Rolf, is that link in the chat as well?
Which link?
For the you were talking about?
Could you repeat, please? I haven't understood.
For the module you just spoke about?
Which module?
I think it's a website.
Yeah, this is a web page.
As a web page test, and AmyJune has it already on the screen share.
Oh, okay. All right, gotcha.
Yeah, Doug just posted it.
And if you take a look, there is in the menu on the right side image analysis, and you have also request map, the option.
I like that. Okay. All right.
And you have also a security test.
Okay. Danke.
Yeah, you know, they're a good start. Like anything, like any good web program, it doesn't catch everything, but it really like takes the bulk out of it. So
Right.
and there's so many free tools that are really good right now too. So evaluating whether or not you really need to buy the $1,000 subscription to some of these tools.
God.
So
Web page test is awesome.
Yep.
All right. Any other questions before we stop the recording?
What page that's okay. I got the URL.
All right. Well, we're not ending the meeting. We're just stopping the recording. So thank you very much again, AmyJune.
All right.